I survived the convergence. I survived the hell that followed. But I started cultivating the starseed crystals too late. 10 years after the apocalypse, fighting a sovereign-class bloom spawn, I finally reached my limit. I expected the void. Instead, I woke up suffocating on cheap cotton. The phantom pain of a severed arm and a crushed heart faded, leaving only the sound of my own frantic breathing. My hands were small. Unscarred. I grabbed the old phone off my desk. The year stared back at me like a hallucination. I hadn't just survived. I had traveled 15 years into the past. That meant I had exactly 5 years before the first meteor of the convergence hit. The noise outside my room brought me back to reality. My parents. The debt from my father's failed guarantor signing was drowning them. In my first life, this stress killed my mother before the apocalypse even began. I watched them suffer, and a cold, absolute certainty settled in my chest. I have 5 years until the world ends. I will not be weak this time. And my family will never suffer over something as trivial as money ever again. I didn't wait for morning. I sneaked out and ran to the edge of Hanseol City. The Sora Basin. Right now, it was just a restricted industrial wasteland. Nobody knew a tiny, undetectable meteor had crashed here a year ago. The infected grass. Millions of starseed crystals. In 2 years, botanists will discover this as a rare plant mutation. But it will take humanity until after the apocalypse to realize these crystals can grant superhuman powers. For the next 5 years, I am the only one who knows. The Manhwa method. The purification technique humanity developed in the bunkers. If you ingest them raw, you die. You have to cycle the alien energy through your heart. I gathered a handful and began the process. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like swallowing liquid glass. The extraterrestrial energy violently ripped through my dormant human meridians, aggressively rewriting my cellular structure. And then, the bottleneck shattered. A shockwave of pure resonance flattened the grass around me. I breathed in, and the air felt different. Lighter. I had awakened my power 5 years early. I was the sole superhuman on Earth. Physical power was secured, but to monopolize the Sora Basin, I needed massive capital. I took the meager 50,000 won I had saved from a part-time job and logged into my father's dormant trading account. It was time to exploit the future. May 15th, Taeyong Heavy Industries was about to announce a massive, hidden accounting scandal, causing a competitor's stock to skyrocket for exactly 48 hours. I put every single one into the competitor. The seed was planted. The next morning, I returned to high school. In my past life, Seo Yuna was my desperate crush, a girl who treated me like dirt because I lacked status. Watching her parade down the hall now, obsessed with high school hierarchy, felt like watching a child play in a sandbox. Suddenly, a heavy arm slung over my shoulder. Park Do-yoon. My best friend. The guy who died covering my escape during the convergence because I was too weak to save him. Seeing him alive made my chest tighten. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The stock had already tripled. I looked at Do-yoon. I knew his father ran a failing biotech company on the verge of bankruptcy. To buy the Sora Basin without raising suspicion, I needed a corporate shell. Park Biotech was going to be my empire. My 50,000 won had tripled into 150,000, but that wasn't enough to buy a cup of coffee in the corporate world. I needed extreme leverage. And to handle extreme leverage, my mind and body needed to process information at superhuman speeds. Night after night, I returned to the Sora Basin in plain clothes. I bypassed the agonizing introductory phase of the Manhwa method. I was absorbing crystals by the handful, expanding my resonance pool until my nervous system felt like it was woven from pure electricity. The next day at school. Do-yoon, Jae-sung, and Hai-rim. The only 3 people who stayed by my side in my previous life when I was nothing. Seeing the four of us together again, laughing about trivial high school things, was a peace I hadn't felt in 15 years. The peace didn't last. Taekyung. A wealthy senior whose father was an executive at Taeyong Heavy Industries. He was Yuna's current obsession. I heard your father's little dirt farming company is getting foreclosed next week, Do-yoon, Taekyung sneered loudly. Maybe Jae-sung can calculate his bankruptcy for him. He didn't get to finish the insult. I stepped between him and my friends. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him and released a fraction of a percent of my resonance, pure, condensed bloodlust from 10 years of apocalyptic war. To Taekyung, it felt like a sovereign-class beast had just wrapped its jaws around his throat. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto the pavement, hyperventilating and scrambling backward. Yuna stared at her perfect senior in absolute disgust. I didn't even break my stride. Let's go, guys. We have places to be. After school, I broke off and asked Do-yoon to bring me to Park Biotech. It was worse than I remembered. Do-yoon's father, Park Sang-chul, had bet his life savings on engineering a drought-resistant crop. It failed entirely. The bank was foreclosing. While Sang-chul wept to his son, I casually touched one of the dead plants on the table. Starseed energy didn't just mutate grass, it fundamentally rewrote cellular biology to survive the apocalypse. I pulsed a microscopic thread of resonance into the soil. The dead plant instantly flushed vibrant green. Mr. Park, I said, dropping my high school persona entirely. You are trying to make crops survive bad soil. What if you pivoted to making plants that actively devour toxic contamination? I represent a silent investor who has the chemical formula for exactly that. And he wants to buy this company today. Sang-chul agreed instantly. I had my corporate shell. But before I could execute the massive options trades to fund it, I had an immediate problem. I walked to Auntie Mi-suk's restaurant, where my mother worked a second job. The low-level loan sharks had arrived early. The thug raised his hand to grab my mother's collar. In my previous life, I had hidden in the alley, too weak to stop this. This time, I stepped into the room. I caught his wrist. I didn't even use resonance, just the raw physical conditioning of the starseeds. His wrist bones audibly cracked. Don't ever touch her, I said coldly, shoving the screaming thug backward. I pulled the envelope holding my 150,001 stock profits, mixed with an advance loan I squeezed out of an underground broker using my market knowledge, and slammed it on the table. The debt was paid in full. My mother cried, thinking a distant relative had sent the money. I let her believe it. Walking home, my phone buzzed. The accounting scandal at Taeyong Heavy Industries just broke the news. Taekyung's family was officially ruined, and my massive short position was about to make me a billionaire. The market opens at 9 a.m. By 9:15 a.m., Taeyong Heavy Industries stock had dropped 80%. When I arrived at the school gates, the real-world consequences were already waiting. Creditors don't wait for the closing bell. Taekyung, the senior who had threatened Do-yoon just yesterday, was weeping on his knees. His father's assets had been frozen, and the underground lenders were liquidating everything they could carry. His gold watch was the first to go. I scanned the crowd. Yuna was standing at the edge of the courtyard. She had spent months carefully curating her image to attach herself to Taekyung's wealth. Watching him get dragged through the dirt, her expression shattered. The social hierarchy she worshipped was an illusion. I didn't stop to gloat. Gloating was for children who got lucky. I walked past the screaming creditors without a second glance. The collapse of Taeyong Heavy Industries wasn't a tragedy to me, it was the fuel for my empire. After school, I met my proxy. Oh, Jin-sung had bought a new suit. 3 days ago, he was a suicidal drunk in a basement. Today, because he executed my short position, his personal commission had made him a multimillionaire. But he knew who truly held the leash. Total liquidated profit is 14 billion won, boss, Jin-sung said, his voice trembling slightly with awe. I've set up the shell corporations exactly as you asked. No paper trail leads back to a 15-year-old high school student. I tapped the screen, transferring the funds. Good, I replied. Listen carefully, Mr. O. You are the face of this money. You drive the cars, you sign the checks. But if you ever try to steal from me, or if you ever reveal my name, there is no corner of this earth where I will not find you. I pulsed a microscopic wave of resonance. Jin-sung turned pale. The next phase moved immediately. Jin-sung, acting as the mysterious angel investor, walked into Park Biotech an hour later. He paid off all their debts, fully funded Sangchul's toxic soil research, and acquired a controlling stake in the company. Do-yoon's family was saved. But Park Biotech was just the vehicle. Using the company's new mandate for large-scale soil decontamination testing, Jin-sung filed the paperwork to purchase the city's abandoned industrial wasteland. The government, desperate to offload the useless dirt, approved it instantly. That night, I stood at the chain-link fence of the Sora Basin. The paperwork had cleared. The deed was secured in a vault under an encrypted corporate shell. This 500-acre wasteland of infected grass officially belonged to me. I closed my eyes and breathed in. I could feel the millions of starseed crystals reacting to my presence. They weren't just rocks, they were living extraterrestrial energy, waiting to be harvested. I had secured the sole source of magic on the planet. My monopoly was absolute. But the timeline is never perfectly clean. Somewhere in the city, sitting on a forgotten shelf in a university biology department, rested a single, dried sample of the blue grass collected by a passing student a year ago. The countdown to discovery had already begun. The land acquisition was finalized. The 500-acre Sora Basin, a neglected industrial wasteland, officially belonged to a corporate shell managed by Jin-sung. For 14 billion won, I had purchased the only source of magic on the planet. Phase 1 was complete. Silently picking grass by hand was over. Jin-sung executed my blueprints flawlessly. Using the massive influx of capital from the Taeyong short position, we had fully industrialized the Sora Basin. Under the guise of soil decontamination research, dozens of automated drones now harvested millions of starseed crystals every single night. The efficiency was terrifying. We weren't just refining crystals, we were automating the cultivation process itself, distilling pure, liquid starlight that no one else in the world could even see. My scaling accelerated. I didn't absorb by the handful anymore, I absorbed the concentrated residue of millions of crystals simultaneously. I gritted my teeth as the extraterrestrial energy hammered my cells, pushing past Tier 1, then Tier 2, relentlessly rewriting my very definition of human. I maintained my low profile during the day, navigating the crumbling hierarchy of Hanseol Central High School. Taekyung was gone, bankrupt and broken. Yuna's status had evaporated with him. I watched her struggle to integrate into the middle-tier cliques, a ghost of her former arrogance. She didn't exist to me. Do-yoon's father, Park Sang-chul, now managed Park Biotech Global, which was rapidly becoming the city's most innovative agricultural decontamination research firm. Our shell was flourishing, hiding the planet's greatest secret behind a shield of legitimate environmental science. My friends were safe. Jae-sung, Do-yoon, and Hai-rim. They didn't understand the complex corporate maneuvers, but they knew the world was getting lighter. They looked confident, their future secured. I'd die before I let the world hurt them again. I didn't need any complex payback for Yuna. The simple consequence of her status chasing was enough. With one tap on my broker app, I initiated the financial short position that would finalize the corporate collapse of Taekyung Sr.'s legacy interests, severing the last link to her old social hierarchy. It was effortless. I left money for my parents again. More than before. When they found it, they didn't just cry, they finally exhaled a breath they'd been holding for 10 years. My mother started buying better food. My father's stoop began to straighten. We established a quiet empire of dust. We automated the magic and laundered the money. A quiet, smooth time skip. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, the months into years. The world remained asleep, unaware that the rules of existence were already broken. 4 years later. 1 year before the convergence. I was 19. The weak 15-year-old boy was entirely erased, replaced by a third-tier awakened who had processed millions of crystals silently. I was physically denser, sharper, and stronger than any human should be. My monopoly was total. The Sora Basin was an industrial fortress, silently feeding me godhood. But I knew the true test was coming. The convergence would not care about my billions of one. It was time to prepare the next flex. The sovereign-class bloom spawn that killed me in the first life. They would be here in 1 year. They thought they were invading a planet of defenseless humans. They were about to learn that Hanseal City was already protected by its own god. 1 year before the sky fell, I initiated the Sanctuary Protocol. Park Biotech Global had spent the last 4 years quietly hoarding steel, concrete, and private security contractors. The Sora Basin was no longer just a farm. It was a fortress. I couldn't fight the apocalypse completely alone. I needed lieutenants. I gathered the only 5 people in the world I trusted into the underground bunker beneath the facility. My proxy, my lead researcher, and my friends. I didn't tell them I was a regressor. The truth was too abstract. Instead, I placed a highly refined starseed crystal on the table. 2 years ago, we didn't just buy toxic dirt, I said, letting the alien light fill the dark room. We bought a microscopic extraterrestrial impact site. I used Jinsung's shell companies to purchase deep space telemetry data to track the origin of this crystal. I lied smoothly. I pulled up the orbital map. The rock that hit here was just a scout. 5 massive planetary killer signatures are entering our orbit. They will hit in exactly 1 year. The government is suppressing the data to prevent panic. Silence suffocated the room. Jinsung turned pale. Sangchul gripped his lab coat. But my friends, Duyun, Jaesung, and Hairim, didn't panic. They looked at the apocalyptic data, and then they looked at me. I had rebuilt their lives from the ground up. If I said the world was ending, they believed me. The surface will burn, and what comes out of those craters will hunt whatever survives, I declared, unleashing my Tier 3 resonance. The bunker shook under the pressure. But this energy is a biological catalyst. I've spent 2 years synthesizing it. We aren't going to hide. We are going to evolve. I didn't give them time to doubt. I handed my friends the purest synthesized crystals the facility had produced. I walked them through the Jomwa method. Do not fight the burn. Cycle it through your heart. The pain means your human limits are breaking. They trusted me implicitly, swallowing the agony without a single scream. I fed my own resonance into their meridians, acting as a stabilizer to prevent the energy from tearing them apart. It was a luxury I never had in my first life. A shockwave ripped through the bunker. Their eyes snapped open, glowing with the unmistakable light of the awakened. It had worked. I was no longer the sole superhuman on Earth. I had created my vanguard. Duyun looked at his hands, watching the alien energy bend to his will. Jaesung adjusted his glasses, his mind already calculating his new reaction speed. Hairim smiled, a sharp, dangerous spark in her eyes. They weren't just high schoolers anymore. With the vanguard awakened, the true preparations began. I authorized Jinsung to liquidate our remaining billions. We bought private military contractors, black market armories, and advanced medical tech, funneling it all into the Sora Basin underground. Sangchul accelerated the crystal refinement to mass production levels. I stood on the fortress wall with my squad, looking out at the glittering lights of Hanseal City. Millions of people sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware that their world had an expiration date. Let the countdown finish. When the sky breaks, we will be the ones waiting for them. Jin Sung's network of shell companies was efficient, but we hit a critical wall. Power was easy to scale, control was not. For my squad to survive the convergence, they needed specialized tactical gear to focus and contain their energy, the kind of rare mineral artifacts that national governments were already quietly locked down. I knew where to find it. 5 years before the apocalypse, a tectonic anomaly had cracked the deep ocean trench, revealing a natural deposit of high-resonance mineral. The world knew it as an anomaly, I knew it as deep iron, the material needed to forge true weapons and armor. My proxy secured a state-of-the-art stealth submarine. Do-yoon's father modified our initial, simple prototype exosuits. They weren't artifacts yet, but they would keep the group alive under deep-sea pressure. The Vanguard was ready for their first true controlled raid. Before the dive, we needed to test synchronization. I sat in the training simulator, monitoring their progress. My focus wasn't on generating power, it was on the flow. In my previous life, I was a brute. This time, I was the architect. Inside the fortress's massive underground testing facility, the Vanguard engaged a Tier 1 automated simulated marine threat. They synchronized their movements. The power of the synthesized crystals was absolute. They were efficient. Precise. Terrifyingly effective for Tier 1. We deployed. The stealth sub descended into the deep ocean trench. The environment was alien, heavy with ancient, natural magic and crushing pressure. At this depth, any human would be flattened instantly. I checked the deep telemetry. I remembered the location. A colossal abyssal kraken, a natural, ancient beast, not a mutated bloom spawn, was already nesting on the deep iron deposit. Normal humans couldn't approach, even nations would need weeks of naval deployment. We had minutes. The kraken wasn't the target, the deep iron was. This material would allow us to forge the first truly contained magical gear. But my past life taught me something critical, artifacts always have guardians. We launched. Min-jun led the way, his newly reinforced tactical uniform handling the pressure through sheer physical density. The squad followed in their prototype exosuits, designed to withstand the initial deep-sea compression. The silt on the ocean floor felt ancient. They met the initial wave of smaller, aggressive deep-sea life. Their synthesized crystals and first-generation exosuits proved superior. They fought cleanly, synchronized. It was satisfying controlled combat, proving their Tier 1 awakening wasn't a fluke. And then, the Guardian woke up. The abyssal kraken. It didn't just move, the entire trench seemed to erupt. Massive tentacles, covered in armored suction cups designed for sub-zero pressure, lashed out with overwhelming, natural godlike force. We were far too small. Do-yoon was caught. His bulky strength exosuit, powered by an initial synthesized crystal, groaned under the pressure. This wasn't a simulation. I could see the initial failure warning lights flashing in his helmet. The physical logic was clean, natural godhood, Tier 1 mastery. Hyrim and Jaesung tried to intervene, but the kraken was too fast, too ancient. I watched Do-yoon gasp. He had done well. They all had. But the tutorial was officially over. If they wanted to progress, they needed to see why my past life gave me a Tier 3 god complex. I stopped holding back. The problem with natural gods is that they haven't spent 10 years refining magic into a razor blade. I unleashed my full Tier 3 resonance underwater. The water around me froze instantly, not from cold, but from pure, compressed atmospheric pressure. I didn't need a weapon. I channeled the intense deep-sea pressure into my body, amplifying the resonance, and then violently pulsed it outward. A shockwave of pure energy, denser than the ocean itself, violently erupted, freezing the kraken's very focus. I didn't punch it, I merely focused the atmospheric pressure. I pointed my finger. I didn't need to yell. The sheer, overwhelming reality-warping density of my resonance simply erased the massive, natural God from existence in a screen-filling, explosive flash. Absolute, deathly deep-sea silence. The abyssal kraken, the natural God that had terrified nations, was a memory. I was completely uninjured. First blood drawn in the deep. My squad, they were just staring. The raid was a success. We secured the deep iron. This rare mineral, now harvested at its purest source, would allow us to forge truly contained high-resonance gear for the entire vanguard. Phase 2 was locked. We returned to the Sora Basin fortress under the cover of night. We had the money, we had the land, and now we had the materials to forge real power. The countdown continued. 17 years old, and already protected by my own God. The 4-year peace was shattered not by a meteor, but by a research paper. The university researcher finally published the Highway Edge Anomaly findings. The Ilgen group Chable instantly realized the anomalous grass sitting outside my fence was worth billions in genetic patents. Ilgen didn't bother offering to buy us out. Director Beck, their ruthless corporate fixer, logic-gated the decision immediately. Park Biotech was a tiny, upstart firm owning the only source of the material. They decided to seize the primary site, use their political connections to legalize it later, and erase anyone who knew the truth. Midnight. Thunder and heavy rain provided the perfect cover. Ilgen Group deployed an elite, deniable Black Ops mercenary unit. They were professional, ghosting the electronic sensors, scaling the outermost reinforced wall I had spent 4 years building. They thought they were infiltrating a research facility. They breached the perimeter, silently neutralizing the outer human guards. My automated drones were deep harvesting, and I had instructed Jin-sung to keep the mercenaries I hired ignorant of the true facility depth. They made rapid progress, cutting toward the main research bunker. The commandos fanned out across the main courtyard, moving toward the reinforced main bunker blast door. They were perfectly synchronized, their high-tech sensors mapping the facility. They were looking for the lead researcher and the data core. They had zero idea they were currently standing directly above a third-tier awakened who was watching their every step. I didn't panic. I didn't send the vanguard. I sat in my penthouse, swirling a glass of refined, liquefied crystal energy, tracking the mercenaries through the vibrations in the very concrete of the base. They were efficient. Highly skilled. But skills are useless against an architect. They reached the main bunker door and began attaching thermal lance charges. Jin-sung, I said into my tactical earpiece. Shut down the external power grid. They like the darkness. Let's give them absolute darkness. The power grid died. Simultaneously, I pulsed a tiny thread of resonance through the central node, generating a massive, localized electromagnetic interference. Their quad-lens night vision goggles went completely dark, the sensors overloaded by an impossible no-light reading. They didn't hear a door opening. I merely targeted the physical space. The reinforced bunker blast door simply ceased to exist, pulverized into steel dust by a directed wave of Tier 3 resonance. I walked casually through the new, void-like entrance I had just carved. They tried to raise their weapons, but their high-tech armor's targeting systems were locked. Their sensors couldn't register me as a biological target. To their military-grade technology, I didn't exist. I was a ghost. A god. They were blind. They were trained for war. I was trained to erase sovereigns. I casually raised my hand. I didn't draw a weapon. I merely targeted the physical frequency of their tactical suits. I snapped my fingers, and the advanced armored composite simply disintegrated, pulverized into raw energy ash. They didn't register me, did they? I said, my voice magnified by resonance until it vibrated through their very bones. The last surviving commando, now defenseless, was crawling on his stomach, paralyzed by sheer, primal terror. This wasn't a raid. It was a harvest. My proxy Jin-sung was safe in the shadows, but I needed to send a message. I didn't erase the entire Chable, yet. I dragged Director Beck from his high-rise hotel to my penthouse. The ruthless corporate fixer was now weeping on my polished floor, broken by a 19-year-old god. I left Beck alive. He will return to the Ilgen Group. He will explain that Park Biotech is not owned by a high school student, but by an untouchable, reality-warping entity that can delete armies at will. Corporate warfare was over. They would never dare to look at my fortress again. Phase 2 was secure. 3 months before the convergence, the sky didn't fall, but reality began to crack. The deep space anomalies were pushing against our atmosphere. A pre-shock spatial tear ripped open in the center of Hanseol City's financial district. The tutorial phase for humanity was officially over. The government response was exactly as useless as I remembered. Conventional weapons, bullets, explosives, tear gas, cannot penetrate extraterrestrial biological shielding. The SWAT teams and local military were being slaughtered. They were fighting magic with lead. We stood on the rooftop above the slaughter. For weeks, we had been forging the deep iron harvested from the Kraken raid into true artifacts capable of channeling high-tier resonance. It was time for the Vanguard's first live-fire field test. I didn't draw a weapon. I didn't need to. I had forged them for exactly this. Do-yoon, secure the perimeter. Jae-sung, overwatch. Hi-rim, execute the stragglers. Do not let a single civilian die. Deploy. I whispered. Do-yoon dropped 40 stories without a parachute, his deep iron boots shattering the asphalt upon impact. The armor effortlessly channeled his Tier 1 physical amplification. A bloom spawn charged him. Do-yoon didn't flinch. He delivered a straight right hook, completely pulverizing the beast's skull. From a fire escape 10 stories up, Jae-sung provided overwatch. His analyst armor fed him wind speed, trajectory, and weak point biological data in real time. He squeezed the trigger. It wasn't a bullet, it was a highly compressed beam of pure resonance. The cyan beam completely bypassed the monster's armor, piercing 3 of them in a single shot before detonating their cores. The military personnel, who had been dying seconds ago, stopped firing entirely, staring in absolute awe at the localized godhood saving them. Hi-rim moved like a shadow. Her deep iron stealth suit suppressed her energy signature until the exact moment of impact. She danced between the remaining beasts, her daggers slicing through their crystalline flesh like hot butter. Clean, efficient, lethal. In less than 40 seconds, the threat that had crippled the military response was entirely neutralized. The breach was sealed. The Vanguard stood among the fading ash, their armors venting faint steam. The surviving SWAT commander looked at them not as soldiers, but as untouchable deities. I watched from above, perfectly still. The deep iron gear held their power flawlessly. The Vanguard was officially combat ready. The world didn't know who we were yet, but when the real convergence arrived in 3 months, they wouldn't pray to the government. They would pray to us. The countdown hit 0. The governments of the world spent the last 3 months lying to the public, claiming the atmospheric disturbances were solar flares. But when the sky turned the color of dried blood and the clouds caught fire, the lies evaporated. The convergence. 5 strikes globally. 1 landed right in our backyard, slamming into the outskirts of Hanseol City. The kinetic shockwave instantly flattened the financial district, erasing billions of dollars of corporate infrastructure in a fraction of a second. The shockwave rolled outward, a wall of absolute destruction. It hit the Sora Basin, and broke like water against a stone. The energy dome Jin-sung and Sangchul had constructed using our massive crystal reserves flared to life, neutralizing the kinetic force completely. We didn't even feel a tremor. The world instantly fractured. The electromagnetic pulse from the meteors fried conventional technology. The government and the military, hiding in their deep bunkers, went deaf and blind. The era of nations was over. The era of factions had just begun. While the surviving chaebol and military remnants cowered in the dark, waiting for the dust to settle, I gave the order to open the gates. We weren't going to wait to be attacked. The meteor brought something far more valuable than destruction. A meteor core. The concentrated extraterrestrial seed that birthed the bloom spawn. Whichever faction controlled the cores would control the new world. I intended to monopolize those, too. We moved through the burning ruins of Hanseal City like ghosts. The ambient radiation and toxic ash that would have killed a normal human barely registered against our resonance fields. We reached the edge of the impact crater in less than 10 minutes. We looked down into the glowing abyss. It was exactly as I remembered. The first sovereign-class bloom spawn. A walking natural disaster. In my first life, this exact beast slaughtered 1 million people before the military finally brought it down with a tactical nuke. My squad didn't flinch. They looked at the colossal god of destruction, and then they looked at me. I drew my blade. For 5 years, I had prepared for this exact moment. It was time to show the universe why time travel is the ultimate cheat code. In my previous life, the roar of a sovereign paralyzed human nervous systems. It was a biological weapon. But my squad didn't drop their weapons, their synthesized resonance fields flared, shielding their minds. The beast was massive, radiating pure, chaotic heat. I could have ended it in one swing. A full tier 3 pulse would have vaporized the monster and the crater itself. But explosive overkill destroys the loot. I needed the meteor core intact. And I needed my squad to realize they could kill gods. Formation Delta, I ordered calmly over the comms. Dismantle it. The Sovereign initiated with a downward strike that could flatten a skyscraper. Du-Yun stepped into the shadow of the claw. His heavy deep iron armor screamed as it channeled his raw physical amplification. He was pushed back, his boots trenching the stone, but his bones didn't break. The tank held the aggro. With the beast focused entirely on crushing Du-Yun, Jae-sung had the opening. I knew every weak point on a sovereign's body from 10 years of bleeding against them. I pinged the exact coordinates to Jae-sung's HUD. He didn't hesitate. A high-density cyan beam pierced the dust. The sniper shot shattered the primary joint's biological shielding. Hi-Rim was already in the air. Utilizing her stealth suit's zero-gravity bursts, she used the stagger to close the gap. Her magenta daggers, forged from deep-sea artifacts, sheared through the exposed tendon like paper. The beast shrieked, losing its balance. They pinned the god. It was a beautiful display of synchronized combat. The colossal beast was forced onto one knee, its chest cavity exposed. I finally moved. I didn't rush. I walked toward the thrashing sovereign, tightly compressing a fraction of my resonance solely into the edge of my blade. I didn't want a shockwave. I wanted a scalpel. I stepped inside its guard and delivered a single, frictionless horizontal slash. The compressed Tier 3 energy bypassed the dense bark and armor entirely, severing the biological connections instantly. The beast froze. The sovereign died before it even realized it had been cut. Its massive body collapsed and dissolved into ash. Kneeling in the remains, I reached into the void and pulled out the prize. The meteor core. Flawless. Untouched. The raw battery for a new era. Du-Yun, Jae-sung, and Hi-Rim regrouped behind me, breathing hard, their deep iron armor venting heat. They had fought the hardest battle of their lives. I hadn't even broken a sweat. I tossed the crimson core to Du-Yun. Store it. We have 4 more to harvest before the military even wakes up. In the distance, the faint, panicked sounds of surviving military helicopters and chaebol dropships began to echo through the smoke. The factions were finally crawling out of their holes, desperate for resources. But the game was already over. The architects had taken the board. They arrived exactly 12 minutes after the impact. The military remnants and the surviving corporate warlords. They had crawled out of their bunkers, expecting to find a glowing rock and maybe some confused alien wildlife. They expected to plant their flags. Hundreds of heavily armed troops surrounded the lip of the crater. The old world's final flex. They aimed their rifles down into the smoke, their laser sights cutting through the gloom, ready to kill whatever had fallen from the sky. Instead of an alien menace, they found us. 4 teenagers in impossibly advanced armor, standing waist-deep in the dissolving ash of a god they couldn't even comprehend. The silence that fell over the crater was heavier than the helicopters overhead. General Choi of the new state forces stepped forward. He didn't understand the ash, nor the armor. He only understood that we were holding the Crimson Meteor Core. By order of the provisional government, surrender that anomaly immediately. You are in violation of martial law, his voice boomed through a megaphone. Martial law. The concept was almost nostalgic. I didn't even look at him. I casually tossed the Sovereign's core to Do-yoon. The Vanguard didn't flinch either. We had just slaughtered an extinction-level entity, a man with a megaphone was background noise. Choi's face contorted. He drew his sidearm. A second later, the metallic clatter of hundreds of assault rifles being cocked echoed across the crater. Hundreds of red laser sights painted our deep iron armor. They were actually going to shoot us. They didn't realize how slow they were. Before Choi even fully extended his arm, Jae-sung had a compressed resonance beam aimed squarely between his eyes, and Hiram was primed to cross the 100-meter crater gap in half a second. But I raised my hand. Hold, I ordered. If the Vanguard killed them, we would be labeled terrorists. But if I simply demonstrated the absolute, unbridgeable gap in our existences, we would be labeled gods. I took a single step forward and released my suppression field. I didn't attack them. I merely made the air too heavy for the old world to exist in. The ambient pressure instantly multiplied. The military helicopters above us sputtered, their rotors unable to cut through the condensed resonance, and crashed heavily into the dust. On the crater lip, the gravity shifted. Hundreds of elite soldiers were slammed to their knees simultaneously, dropping their weapons as they gasped for breath. General Choi's face was pressed into the dirt, his arrogant bravado crushed under the sheer, suffocating weight of my aura. There is no martial law, my voice echoed effortlessly across the breathless silence, carrying absolute, chilling authority. The factions may fight over the scraps of this city. But the cores belong to Sanctuary. If you point a weapon at my vanguard again, I will not simply make you kneel. I withdrew the pressure, letting them gasp for air. We turned our backs on the trembling armies of the old world and walked away into the red smoke. They didn't fire a single shot as we left. They finally understood the new hierarchy. We were Sanctuary, and we were untouchable. We walked back into Sanctuary and the massive steel blast doors sealed behind us, locking out the apocalypse. The air inside the fortress was scrubbed, cool, and perfectly filtered. We had just slaughtered a god, but crossing that threshold felt like coming home after a long shift. The Vanguard stripped off their heavy upper plating. They were exhausted, but their eyes held a new, unshakable confidence. They had tasted the pinnacle of combat and survived without a scratch. Do-yoon carried the Crimson Meteor Core under his arm like a trophy. We brought the core to the central biolab. Park Sang-chul, who had spent 4 years synthesizing microscopic grass crystals, stared at the basketball-sized heart of a sovereign like he was looking at the face of God. The energy density. He whispered, his hands trembling. It's infinite. I gave the order to integrate it. The moment Sang-chul locked the core into Sanctuary's main grid, the fortress didn't just power up, it evolved. The ambient resonance inside the base spiked exponentially, shifting from cold industrial machinery to a living, breathing magical citadel. With the base secured and synthesizing the new energy, I moved to the command center. Jin-sung had repurposed our deep harvesting drones into stealth reconnaissance units. The global satellites were dead, but Sanctuary had eyes on Hanseal City. The feed was a bloodbath. Crater number 2. The factions that had fled our suppression field didn't retreat to their bunkers, they just redirected to the next closest impact site. They were fighting each other for the right to fight the Sovereign. It was a meat grinder. Their bullets did nothing against the terrestrial behemoth nesting there. Jin-sung looked sick watching the slaughter. I just smiled. Let them bleed, I said. They are weakening the beast's outer biological shielding for us. We wait until the military deploys their heavy ordnance and exhausts the Sovereign's core reserves. I left the command center to Jin-sung and entered my private refinement chamber. The energy radiating from the new reactor was intoxicating. The microscopic grass crystals had pushed me to Tier 3. Absorbing the ambient radiation of a Sovereign's core was going to push me to the threshold of a god. The Zhonghua method was violent, even now. The crimson energy forced my physical meridians to expand, burning away the last vestiges of human biological limits. My bone density increased. My reaction speed folded into microseconds. The architect was leveling up. Across the base, the vanguard was doing the same. Sangchul had routed the new energy directly into the armory's forges. They were upgrading their deep iron gear, laughing about the raid, entirely shielded from the horrors outside. I gave them this piece. In return, they gave me their absolute blades. 3 hours later, Jin-sung pinged me. The military had finally dropped a bunker buster missile into Crater 2. It didn't kill the Sovereign, but it shattered its armor. The meat grinder had done its job. I picked up a tactical marker and slammed it onto the map. Vanguard. Suit up. We're stealing the second core. Crater number 2. The factions had spent the last 4 hours throwing thousands of lives and millions of dollars of high explosives at a single target. The bunker buster missile had done its job, the terrestrial Sovereign's impenetrable outer shell of molten rock and bone was finally cracked. We stood on a shattered overpass above the chaos, watching the humans exhaust their final magazines. The beast was heavily damaged, its core exposed, but the military was broken. They had no heavy ordnance left to finish the job. It was the perfect time to strike. Vanguard, I said softly over the comms. Take the prize. Do-yoon didn't hesitate. He bypassed the human barricades by simply dropping from the overpass like a human meteor. He slammed directly into the Sovereign's shattered face, his resonance field absorbing the molten heat effortlessly. The beast roared, trying to crush Do-yoon, but its arms suddenly gave out. Jae-sung was already painting the exposed joints. His sniper artifact didn't fire kinetic rounds, it fired sustained, hyper-compressed resonance beams that instantly cauterized and severed the beast's internal biology. Hyrim used Do-yoon's aggro to scale the beast's back. Her stealth suit completely negated the Sovereign's thermal radiation. Moving with impossible agility, her magenta daggers severed the primary energy veins feeding the beast's core, crippling its regeneration. In 30 seconds, my vanguard had completely immobilized a Sovereign that an entire army couldn't kill in 4 hours. I descended from the overpass, hovering directly in front of its exposed chest cavity. I raised my blade, and channeled a massive pillar of Tier 3 resonance into the steel. The slash was completely silent. The overwhelming density of the resonance instantly vaporized the remaining molten rock without a shockwave. As the colossal beast began to dissolve into a mountain of orange ash, I reached in and secured the second meteor core. Silence fell over the crater. The surviving faction soldiers slowly stood up from behind their barricades. They had lost thousands of men to crack the shell, only to watch 4 teenagers drop from the sky, kill the unkillable god in less than a minute, and take the prize. A Chable captain raised his rifle, trembling, wanting to demand the core. I simply turned my head and looked at him. The ambient pressure of my resonance flared for a microsecond. The captain dropped his weapon and stepped backward. They didn't dare speak. We didn't gloat. We didn't claim territory. We simply walked out of the crater with the second core, leaving the exhausted armies to fight over the empty ash. The factions thought they were playing a game of conquest. We were just collecting puzzle pieces. Crater number 3. We arrived exactly 1 hour after the drop, expecting another slaughter. Instead, we found silence. The sovereign was already dead. But it hadn't been killed by military artillery or Chable lasers. Jae-sung scanned the massive corpse. The biological shielding hadn't been pierced from the outside. "Commander," Jae-sung said, his voice tense. "They blew it up from the inside. Raw, unrefined crystal detonations. Someone fed it living humans overloaded with starseed shards. A suicide tactic. Horrific, but brutally effective. The factions were adapting faster than in my first life. The ambient energy of my sanctuary had accelerated the timeline. I locked onto the residual energy signature of the missing core. They hadn't gone far. We tracked the signature to the abandoned subway tunnels. The scavenger syndicate. They weren't soldiers or corporate elites, they were street-level survivors who figured out that consuming raw crystals gave them power. They were also dying from it. I didn't bother using the stairs. We breached through the reinforced concrete ceiling, dropping directly onto the tracks. The syndicate thugs instantly raised their scavenged weapons, but they froze when they saw the deep iron armor. They recognized the apex predators from the crater. Kwang-ho laughed. He had consumed enough raw shards to survive a Tier 1 awakening, though his mind was rotting from the radiation. "The so-called untouchables," he yelled. "You think you own this city? We killed the bird. We took the core. We're the new gods now." I didn't even draw my blade. I just nodded. Do-yoon and Hyrim moved. The syndicate thugs charged, fueled by their raw, unstable mutations. It wasn't a fight, it was a cleanup. The vanguard dismantled their entire frontline in less than 4 seconds without using a single lethal strike. Kwang-ho roared, his body surging with the chaotic purple energy of raw crystals. He lunged at me with speed that would have ripped a normal human in half. I caught his fist with an open palm. The kinetic force shattered the concrete beneath us, but I didn't even shift my weight. "You're not a god," I whispered, letting my Tier 3 resonance flare, violently suffocating his unstable aura instantly. "You're just a parasite feeding on poison." The realization broke him. The raw crystals in his blood recognized a true apex predator, and his power simply collapsed in terror. I stripped the yellow core from his hands and left him kneeling in the dust. The scavenger syndicate was broken. We now held 3 of the 5 cores on the planet. The human factions were trying desperately to adapt, but they were playing catch-up to a ghost. 2 left. Crater number 4. This anomaly didn't just bring a monster, it altered the rules of existence. An absolute zero field expanded outward from the impact zone, instantly turning the surrounding cityscape into a silent, white tomb impossible for any human technology to survive. Humanity was paralyzed. But we had the sanctuary reactor. Using the synthesized energy of the first 2 cores, Park Sang-chul and I spent 48 hours engineering a solution. We integrated high-tier thermal resonance conduits directly into our deep iron armor. We were building the only suits on Earth capable of walking through the tundra. We arrived at the safe zone boundary. While military commanders watched helplessly with binoculars from miles away, we walked forward. I took the first step into the dead zone. The moment I crossed the line, the thermal logic initiated, flaring to life and generating a protective shimmering heat haze around my cloak. It worked. We marched. Standard speed was useless, the anomaly fought us with environmental logic. Do-yoon took point, utilizing his heavy kinetic density and the new thermal patterns to act as a physical plow through the glacial ice formations. We cut through the tundra in silence, a shimmering spear of heat in a dead world. We reached the impact epicenter. The 4th sovereign. It was exactly as I feared, a glacial-class entity. It wasn't a beast nesting in the ice, it was the ice itself, composed of ancient, impenetrable translucent structure and pulsing blue veins, woven directly into the spatial tier structure. I attacked. I launched from the ice and delivered a standard tier 3 upward strike, channeling enough resonance to pulverize a tank. The blade hit the ancient translucent structure, and bounced. The kinetic logic failed. This wasn't standard ice, it was an invincible shield enhanced by the spatial tear itself. Physicality was useless. I regrouped my team. Jae-sung, confirm energy resonance. He pinged the anomaly data, the spire was invincible to kinetic logic. I made a command decision based on future knowledge. We needed elemental logic. Vanguard. Connect your grids. We are bypassing tier 3 destruction, we are initiating elemental synthesis. I used my command authority as the architect to link our energy systems into Sanctuary's core network. We bypassed the standard destructive pulse. We initiated an extreme elemental synthesis, merging the raw heat conduit synthesized from cores 1 and 2 plus my tier 3 authority into a specialized plasma resonance. We created a contained star. I didn't punch or slice. I unleashed the elemental truth. I channeled the contained star-hot plasma resonance directly into the glacial sovereign's ancient core. There was no resistance. The absolute, star-hot energy simply vaporized the invincible glacial structures instantly. Miles of ancient ice and serpentine god simply ceased to exist, replaced by a towering mushroom cloud of steam. The steam dissolved. The invincible tundra was gone, replaced by a steaming lake of melt and slush. Kneeling in the slush, I secured the 4th prize. A perfect, deep icy blue meteor core. We had secured 4 of the 5 seeds, and we were completely uninjured. We turned our backs on the steaming ruin and walked away, back toward the edge of the absolute zero anomaly. We didn't look at the human military. In the distance, we could see their binoculars pointed helplessly at the dissolving steam cloud. They thought the world was frozen, we showed them the architects control the elements. 1 left. Crater number 5. I expected a sovereign. Instead, I found a fortress. The remaining human factions finally stopped fighting each other. The new state military and the Iljan group formed a united front, deploying their entire surviving arsenal to secure the final impact site. They didn't just build a wall, they built a snare. The moment we crossed the perimeter, the glowing resonance lines on our deep iron armor died. The united front had weaponized the 5th core, creating a massive localized dampening field that completely neutralized ambient magic. For the first time in 4 years, we were just human. Dozens of searchlights pinned us against the dark sky. General Choi, the man I had humiliated days ago, stood atop a tank. Your magic is gone, boy, his voice boomed over the loudspeakers. You are trespassing on United Front territory. Execute them all. A wall of lead and fire tore the ridge apart. Choi expected us to stand there and rely on energy shields that no longer existed. He forgot that before I taught them magic, I spent 4 years making sure their baseline physical combat training was flawless. Bullets chewed the rock inches from my face. I didn't have my tier 3 godhood. I couldn't snap my fingers and erase them. I smiled. It had been a long time since I had to play chess. Vanguard. Protocol Ghost. We don't need magic to dismantle a machine. Cut the head off. Du-Yun couldn't use his energy gauntlets, so he used the 200-pound dead weight of his deep iron armor. Moving with terrifying martial precision, he dropped into the trenches, breaking bones and disarming squads with pure, brutal physical momentum. Jae-sung couldn't fire his resonance rifle. He didn't need to. His analyst training meant he had already memorized the electrical schematics of every conventional weapon on the field. Using standard flashbangs and stolen sidearms, he systematically sabotaged their heavy turrets, plunging their camp into darkness. Hiram's suit couldn't bend light anymore. She just used the darkness Jae-sung created. Stripped of magic, she was still the deadliest CQC assassin in the city. She ghosted through their ranks, a whisper of carbon steel, leaving chaos and panic in her wake. General Choi thought taking away our magic leveled the playing field. He didn't realize it just brought us down to a level where we could beat him with experience. While my squad dismantled his army, I walked right through his collapsing frontline and pressed cold, dead steel against his throat. "Checkmate," I whispered. I didn't kill him. I simply reached past his trembling shoulder and ripped the fifth core out of the dampening machine's terminal. The suffocating gray field shattered instantly. The moment the field dropped, our suppressed magic violently rushed back into our meridians. Massive pillars of Tier 3 resonance erupted across the crater, illuminating the night. The surviving soldiers dropped their guns. They had given everything to fight humans, only to realize the gods had just returned. Phase 1 was officially over. Phase 1 was complete. The 5 meteor cores were locked into the central grid. The raw, infinite energy of 5 dead sovereigns coursed through the veins of our fortress. The sanctuary was no longer just a bunker, it was the most powerful battery on the planet. I wasn't just a fighter anymore, I was a commander. I stood before the holographic map of the ruined city, planning the logic architecture of our new empire. The military and the chaebol were bleeding each other for territory, but they were fighting over scraps. I held the monopoly on true power. The factions are trying to re-establish emergency broadcasting networks using old military satellites, Jin-sung reported, his fingers flying across the terminal. I've sliced into their routing logic. I can give you global admin override for exactly 60 seconds. I nodded. Do it. Across the ruins of Hanseal City, every surviving screen, military monitor, and scavenged radio violently snapped to a single frequency. The faction leaders expected an emergency government broadcast. Instead, they saw me. "This is not a negotiation," my voice echoed through the ruins, amplified by pure resonance. "The era of nations is dead. The factions are obsolete. We hold the cores. We hold the power. From this moment forward, this territory belongs to the Awakened Guild." I let the name hang in the air. The Awakened Guild. It wasn't a military junta or a corporate board. It was a new system of logic designed specifically for this reality. The old faction leaders watched their authority evaporate in real time. They were no longer the apex. To those who have consumed the shards and suffer the mutations, my broadcast continued as our massive steel blast doors slowly ground open to the wasteland. "The military will shoot you. The chaebol will experiment on you. The Awakened Guild will teach you how to survive." I assigned Duyun and Hyrim to manage the intake. We weren't a charity, we were building an army. They scanned the refugees, filtering out faction spies and selecting the lesser awakened who had potential. It was an automated logic system for guild deployment: assess, recruit, train, deploy. Jae-sung took over the internal logic architecture. He designed the training regimens, categorizing the new recruits by their resonance potential. We were transitioning from a 4-man strike squad to an asynchronous guild management system. I provided the energy, they built the infrastructure. I watched my guild operate from the penthouse. In my first life, humanity was reactive, constantly pushed to the brink of extinction. This time, we were proactive. The Awakened Guild was fully operational, automated, and growing stronger every hour. Let the factions plot in the dark. We owned the light. Building an army required breaking weak habits. I tasked Duyun with the physical conditioning of our new lesser awakened. Using his resonance, he blanketed the training floor in a crushing, localized gravity field. He forced them through hours of absolute physical failure, high-volume push-ups and agonizing negative pull-ups, until their meridians forcibly expanded to handle the magic. Managing thousands of recruits manually was inefficient. Jae-sung developed an automated inspection schedule. Every recruit was branded with a temporary resonance crest on their uniform, a magical tag that perfectly mirrored their unique biological energy signature. Jae-sung's system tracked their growth, loyalty, and vitals in real time. The system was flawless, which meant it immediately caught the anomaly. During the third set of gravity drills, a recruit's tag flashed crimson on Jae-sung's tablet. The physical crest didn't match the internal meridian flow. The recruit was artificially masking his energy to appear weaker than he was. A spy from the United Front. The factions thought they could infiltrate us and steal our reactor data. They didn't realize we were tracking their heartbeats. I didn't want a public execution to disrupt the drills. I pinged Hi-Rim. In a fraction of a second, the spy was silently extracted from the formation and dragged into the dark. The spy was dragged to the sublevels. He was a hardened Chable operative, trained to resist torture. He thought we were going to beat the United Front's tactical plans out of him. He thought this was a standard corporate espionage war. I stepped into the cell. I didn't draw a weapon. I didn't raise my voice. The old me would have killed him instantly to protect the guild's secrets. But the architect understood that fear is a poor motivator compared to existential dread. You think you are fighting a war for Hanseol City, I said softly, letting my resonance bleed into the air, manipulating the ambient dust into a glowing, three-dimensional projection of the cosmos. Your generals are arguing over borders on a dying rock. I showed him the truth I learned at the end of my first life. The Kardashev scale, I whispered. The universe measures civilizations by their energy output. The 5 meteors weren't an invasion. They were a test. The Great Filter. The cosmic architects drop the cores to see if a planet can harness them and evolve into a Type 1 civilization. I let the projection shift, showing the true scale of the Bloom-spawn armada waiting in the deep dark if we failed the test. If humanity remains divided, fighting over scraps and sending spies like you, the filter will sweep us away. The true convergence hasn't even begun. The spy's mind was utterly broken by the scale of the reality he was living in. The petty squabbles of the Chables seemed like bacteria fighting on a corpse. I ordered Hi-Rim to cut his bindings. Go back to your generals, I commanded, stepping into the hall. Tell them to submit to the awakened guild, or die in the dark. The clock is ticking. The spy delivered my message. But fear is a fragile thing. When confronted with the existential horror of the Great Filter, General Choi and the Chable leaders didn't submit. They snapped. Denial is the human brain's final defense mechanism. They convinced themselves that if they destroyed me, the cosmic nightmare would disappear. Within 12 hours, they mobilized every remaining asset they had. The United Front threw their entire surviving military might at the Sora Basin. It was the largest human army assembled since the convergence began. They were marching to their own execution. I didn't even bother putting on my armor. Jae-sung projected the satellite feed into my penthouse. They are in artillery range, Guild Master, he reported calmly. Shall I authorize the vanguard? I took a sip of my drink. No. Let them fire. I want to test the new reactor grid. General Choi gave the order. The United Front unleashed a devastating barrage of high-explosive artillery. Hundreds of tank shells and bunker busters tore through the red sky, aimed directly at our main gates. It was enough firepower to level a mountain. They didn't even scratch the paint. The moment the first shell crossed the perimeter, Sanctuary's automated defense grid activated. Powered by the infinite, combined resonance of 5 sovereign cores, a colossal, multicolored geometric aegis flared to life. The artillery simply detonated harmlessly against the absolute magical barrier. The bombardment lasted for 10 minutes. When the smoke cleared, the sanctuary stood pristine and glowing. Choi's army had exhausted 50% of their munitions and hadn't breached the outer yard. The psychological damage was immediate. They realized they were throwing pebbles at a fortress. I pinged Deun's comms. The shield test is complete. Deploy the recruits. Let's see if your gravity training paid off. The massive steel gates groaned open. Do-yoon didn't charge out wildly. He led a perfectly synchronized phalanx of our new lesser awakened. They marched out into the wasteland in utter, terrifying silence. The clash was completely one-sided. Do-yoon's brutal physical conditioning combined with Sanctuary's clean resonance exposure had turned scavengers into super soldiers. They leaped over tanks, their synthesized blades carving through military-grade armor like wet paper. They fought with a cold, calculated efficiency that broke the United Front's morale in minutes. The Vanguard captains didn't even need to use their full power. They merely acted as Overwatch. Hi-Rim culled the Chable commanders in the shadows, and Jae-sung casually swatted their remaining missiles out of the sky with surgical sniper fire. It wasn't a battle, it was a live-fire training exercise for the guild. I watched from my balcony as the last of the old world surrendered. General Choi's army was dismantled in less than 20 minutes. The factions were finally erased. Hanseal City now belonged entirely to the awakened guild. The foundation of the empire was set. Now, we prepare for the world. In 2 weeks, the awakened guild achieved what the United Front couldn't do in 4 months. We didn't just survive the apocalypse, we industrialized it. Using our recruits and the reactor's infinite energy, we systematically cleared the rubble, restoring order to Hanseal City. The peninsula was ours. But peace on a global scale is a myth. Jae-sung's upgraded satellite network brought the rest of the world online. The superpowers, America, China, Russia, had stabilized under their own national level awakened. And they had noticed the blinding, massive energy signature radiating from our tiny peninsula. The Atlas Corporation, the syndicate that had monopolized the United States, made the first move. They didn't send an army, armies are loud. They sent a stealth dropship, parking it high above the clouds in optical camouflage. They wanted to steal our reactor schematics and assassinate the leadership. Their operative was a Tier 2 awakened specialized in spatial distortion. Using an incredibly rare, preconvergent spatial artifact, he created a microtear in reality, allowing him to go straight through our impenetrable 5-core energy shield. He thought he was a genius. Agent Thomas infiltrated the inner sanctum. His spatial phasing bypassed every physical and magical security measure Jae-sung had installed. He moved through the base completely undetected, a ghost in the machine, heading straight for the Guildmaster's penthouse. He truly believed he was the apex predator. He breached my penthouse. His stealth was flawless, he made no sound, displaced no air, and emitted no thermal signature. He drew his silver resonance blade, preparing to execute the unknown leader of the Korean anomaly and claim the territory for Atlas. Your spatial frequency is incredibly loud, I said into the absolute darkness, not even bothering to stand up. You can step out of physical phase, Agent, but your heartbeat is still vibrating in my city. Thomas panicked and lunged. I didn't draw my sword. I didn't even stand up. I simply tapped the rim of my glass, channeling a dense pulse of Tier 3 resonance into the ambient air. The micro-shockwave instantly shattered his spatial blade and slammed him into the marble floor with the weight of a truck. He was paralyzed instantly. A Tier 2 assassin from a global superpower, crushed without me ever leaving my chair. I looked down at him, letting the terrifying, suffocating density of my true aura bleed into his mind. I didn't kill him. A corpse sends a message, but a broken man tells a story. I stripped his spatial artifact, overpowered its logic, and forcibly tore a rift directly back into his stealth dropship waiting in orbit. I threw him back to his masters. I stood on the balcony and watched the invisible distortion in the clouds flee back across the Pacific. The Atlas Corporation now knew that Korea was not a ruin waiting to be conquered. It was an apex territory. Let the superpowers scheme. The world was finally looking at the awakened guild, and I was ready for them. The Atlas Corporation's failed infiltration proved one thing, the world was watching. We needed to project absolute, impenetrable stability. But with minor spatial rifts constantly popping up across the peninsula, the vanguard couldn't be everywhere at once. We needed an economy. Jae-sung finalized the logic architecture for our operations. We couldn't manually command thousands of recruits. Instead, we structured the awakened guild's deployment like an asynchronous management system. It was a flawless algorithm designed to turn human survival into a numbers game. The system evaluated every recruit's physical resonance and assigned them a combat value. When a minor rift opened, the network automatically grouped the optimal squad and dispatched them asynchronously. We essentially built an automated farming engine. Our lower-tier hunters handled the minor battles autonomously, constantly funneling lesser cores back to the sanctuary. It worked perfectly. Out in the ruined suburbs, Squad 42 executed their assigned raid. There was no screaming or panicked heroics. Because of Do-yoon's brutal gravity training and Jae-sung's tactical playbooks, the recruits dismantled the lesser bloom spawn with mechanical efficiency. The minor beasts didn't drop sovereign cores, but they dropped starseed crystals. The moment a monster died, the recruit's uniform crest scanned the drop and updated the sanctuary's resource ledger in real time. It was a beautiful, unbroken loop of violence and economic growth. While the factions in America and China were still losing hundreds of men a day trying to secure single city blocks, our automated system was harvesting thousands of crystals an hour. The sanctuary's vaults overflowed. Our baseline energy reserves grew so dense it started altering the weather patterns over Korea. The global superpowers noticed the shift. They saw the satellite telemetry. Korea wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The ambient magical radiation over Hanseol City was completely stabilized. They realized the awakened guild had achieved what no other nation could, total system optimization. They couldn't assassinate me, and they couldn't compete with our economy. So, they resorted to diplomacy. Jin-sung handed me a physical letter delivered by a terrified corporate envoy at our borders. It bore the golden crest of the Atlas Corporation. An invitation. The Global Awakened Summit in New York City. The national-level hunters of America, China, and Russia wanted to sit down with the Guild Master of Korea. They wanted to negotiate the distribution of our technology and cores. I crushed the letter, letting it burn into blue ash. They wanted a negotiation. They thought they were inviting a peer to a political table. They had no idea they were inviting the architect. Vanguard, pack your bags, I said, staring out at my city. We're going to America. New York City. Or what was left of it. The Atlas Corporation hadn't rebuilt society, they had just weaponized the ruins. Their headquarters was a brutalist steel mountain, projecting military dominance over the starving factions outside their walls. This was where the apex predators of the old world came to divide the globe. They wanted to set the tone immediately. When our transport cleared the airspace, Atlas cleared their main landing pad and deployed their entire vanguard. Hundreds of elite, heavily armored hunters and 4 newly engineered, resonance-powered combat mechs. It was a calculated display of overwhelming force meant to break my nerve before negotiations even started. Our transport was silent. Jae-sung had designed it using the synthesized gravity technology from the glacial sovereign. It didn't use jet fuel, it manipulated spatial density. It descended onto the concrete without kicking up a single speck of dust, completely alien compared to their bulky, roaring war machines. The ramp lowered. The American hunters immediately tensed, their hands hovering over their weapons, expecting heavily armored warlords. Instead, we stepped out in pristine, tailored bespoke suits. We didn't bring weapons. We didn't wear armor. We didn't need to. As we walked across the tarmac, Do-yoon let out a bored sigh. He didn't activate an attack, he simply stopped suppressing his passive Tier 2 gravity field. The concrete spider-webbed. The elite American hunters choked on the sudden atmospheric pressure, and the knees of their 50-foot combat mechs began to buckle and spark under the immense weight. High above on the observation deck, Commander Graves, the national-level hunter of America, watched his intimidation tactic fail miserably. He had spent billions building those mechs to fight sovereigns. He was watching 4 teenagers in business suits crush them simply by breathing the same air. I stopped walking. I didn't look at the struggling soldiers or the sparking mechs. I tilted my head up and made direct eye contact with Graves through the reinforced glass of his balcony hundreds of feet above. I let a fraction of my tier 3 aura pierce the glass. The message was received. The suppression field vanished, and we were escorted in absolute, terrified silence to the top floor. The global summit. The national-level hunters of the remaining superpowers were already seated. They had survived the apocalypse through sheer brutality, and the room reeked of blood and ego. We entered the room. I didn't announce myself. The density of my resonance displaced the air, dropping the temperature by 10 degrees and causing the overhead lights to flicker. The battle-hardened warlords of China and Russia stopped talking instantly. Every instinct in their newly awakened bodies screamed at them that an apex predator had just entered the cage. I walked past their elite guards, who were too paralyzed by the pressure to even twitch, and took the empty seat at the head of the table. I was the youngest person in the room by 20 years, but age meant nothing anymore. Only cores mattered. You invited me here to discuss the distribution of my technology, I said softly, the silence in the room absolute. I appreciate the hospitality. But let me save us all some time. I am not here to share the sanctuary. I am here to tell you the price you will pay for my protection when the real war starts. My demand shattered their fragile egos. They had spent months ruling their fractured continents like gods. Ivan Volkov, the national-level hunter of Russia, snapped first. He slammed his fists on the table, his massive frame erupting in a boiling, blood-red aura that violently shook the entire skyscraper. "You arrogant child!" Volkov roared, his voice like a detonating artillery shell. He lunged across the massive table, shattering the mahogany into splinters. He channeled the entirety of his national-level power into a single, devastating right hook aimed directly at my skull. It was a strike meant to level a city block. I didn't move from my chair. I simply raised my index finger. The Russian's fist, carrying enough kinetic energy to vaporize steel, collided with my fingertip. There was no explosion. No shockwave. My compressed Tier 3 resonance instantly swallowed his power whole. The room went dead silent. I let my aura expand by exactly 1%. The ambient gravity around Volkov multiplied instantly. His red aura shattered like cheap glass, and the national-level hunter was slammed face-first into the carpet, coughing blood, entirely paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating weight of my presence. Before the other leaders could even process the defeat, the fortress alarms began screaming. Blaring red emergency lights bathed the boardroom. The skies over New York City tore open. It wasn't a minor rift. It was a planetary-scale anomaly. The first true wave of the Great Filter had arrived, right on schedule. Millions of them. Winged, screeching anomalies pouring out of the sky like a biblical plague. Commander Graves rushed to the glass, his face pale as he watched his heavily fortified city defenses activate. The anti-air turrets fired wildly into the swarm, but it was like throwing sand at a tsunami. Graves screamed into his comms, ordering his elite vanguard and the 50-foot mechs into action. He watched in absolute despair as his billion-dollar war machines were swarmed and dismantled in less than 30 seconds. His national-level military was being erased in real time. I didn't look out the window. I gestured to Jae-sung. He stepped forward and tossed a sleek black folder onto the edge of the table. It slid open, revealing a single document. The Apex Treaty. A full, unconditional surrender of global tactical command to the awakened guild. Your armies are dead. Your mechs are scrap. My voice cut perfectly through the blaring alarms and the screeching monsters outside. In 10 minutes, New York City will cease to exist. I looked back at the terrified world leaders. Sign the paper, and I will clear your sky. Refuse, and I will watch you burn. There was no hesitation. Pride evaporates when faced with total extinction. Graves scrambled to the table, his hands shaking so violently he nearly snapped the silver pen as he signed his nation over to my command. The others followed instantly. The world was mine. I took the signed treaty and handed it to Jae-sung. Then, I turned and stepped out of the shattered 100-story window into the raging storm. I didn't fall. I hovered before the millions of descending nightmares and drew my blade. It was time to show the universe why Earth belonged to me. The moment I stepped past the threshold of the Atlas building, the sky over New York City ceased to exist. In its place was a colossal, seething sea of black, winged nightmares, an ocean of claws and teeth descending to consume the planet. Against this absolute darkness, I was a single point of light. Back in the boardroom, the national-level hunters of the old world stood frozen. They had spent their lives commanding armies and fighting single gods. They watched as I, a teenager in a business suit, positioned myself between them and an impossible sea of annihilation. They realized they weren't watching a soldier, they were watching a deity. I did not swing the blade. The great filter was a test of refinement, not destruction. I channeled the entirety of my Tier 3 resonance solely into the edge of the deep iron. The blue-white light compressed until the atmospheric reality around the blade began to warp and melt from the sheer density of the power. Refinement protocol, I whispered, the words amplified by the space around me. Void cleave. I did not attack them. I attacked the dimensional stability of the space they occupied. I executed a single, silent horizontal slash. It was frictionless. A blinding, razor-thin line of pure condensed blue-white resonance, miles wide, cleaved the entire horizontal horizon. It was a perfect aesthetic of zero energy loss. The effect was instantaneous, quiet, and absolute. The millions of screeching monsters didn't explode. Their physical, biological structures simply dissolved the microsecond they touched the void cleave, erased from the timeline and refined into particles of raw energy and ash. It was too quiet for annihilation. The horizontal line faded. The seething ocean of monsters was gone. In less than 1 second, the void cleave had simultaneously erased millions of entities from the physical dimension. The massive black spatial rift above, destabilized by the sudden refinement of the environment, began violently collapsing inward, receding back into the void. The blaring alarms stopped. The red lights vanished. The sanctuary's automated systems immediately began processing the harvest. Jin-sung, who had remained calm, accessed the network data terminal. The national-level hunters of the world stared in pure, religious terror as the terminal rapid processed the yield, thousands of years of stabilized energy reserves, synthesized in 1 single second. I stepped back into the boardroom. I wasn't sweating. My suit wasn't creased. The apocalypse outside had been erased, and the massive spatial rift was gone. I walked past the frozen world leaders, sheathed my blade, and casually took my seat at the head of the table. I picked up my glass of crystal energy. "Your armada is dead, Commander Graves," I said softly, looking at his trembling, pale face. "I kept my promise. I saved your city. Now, we discuss my global quotas." The Apex Treaty wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a global supply chain. The superpowers of the old world surrendered their hoarded resources, funneling endless streams of advanced tech, raw crystals, and capital directly into Hanseal City. The awakened guild was no longer just an army. We were the absolute center of the Earth's economy. But wealth couldn't kill a sovereign. To survive the Great Filter, our recruits needed to fight apocalyptic threats without dying in the process. I gave Jae-sung the global tech imports and unlimited reactor energy. He designed a flawless, asynchronous training environment. He called it the Metanoia Protocol. The Metanoia chamber wasn't just virtual reality. It was a localized spatial distortion field powered directly by the 5-core reactor. It could perfectly synthesize the physical mass, gravity, and resonance pressure of any enemy we had previously recorded in our relational database. To optimize their tactical awareness, Jae-sung locked the chamber's spatial gravity to a strict, side-scrolling combat plane. It forced the recruits to master linear spacing and evasion without getting flanked. The system's combat handlers tracked every swing, translating their physical kinetic force into real-time damage metrics. Jae-sung watched from the observation deck, a rare smile of satisfaction on his face. The back-end architecture was holding up flawlessly under the magical load. Metanoia allowed us to run thousands of asynchronous combat simulations simultaneously, updating the entire guild stat database in real time without a single casualty. It was a masterpiece of magical engineering. But any system is only as good as its upper limits. I dismissed the exhausted recruits and stepped onto the glowing white grid myself. Jae-sung, I called out to the observation deck. Load the glacial sovereign profile. Override safety limiters. Let's stress test the schema. The grid turned red. The system screamed as it tried to pull enough energy from the reactor to simulate a Tier 3 extinction-level entity. The glacial sovereign materialized before me, a terrifying mountain of corrupted crimson wireframes and simulated absolute zero pressure. I didn't hesitate. I reached across to my left hip, the historically optimized position to maximize rotational torque for a long blade, and drew my weapon. The deep iron screamed as my blue-white resonance flooded its structure. The simulated god roared and lunged at me. I met its charge with a single, unsuppressed Tier 3 upward slash. I didn't even use void cleave. The moment my blade connected with the crimson wireframe, the physics engine violently ruptured. The combat handlers couldn't calculate a kinetic value that high. The database schema instantly shattered. The artificial gravity collapsed. The room snapped back to a pristine white grid, smelling heavily of ozone and melted copper. Up in the observation deck, Jae-sung was rubbing his temples as his primary server sparked and died. Well, I called out, sheathing my blade on my left hip. The recruits will love it. But you need a bigger database for me. My Tier 3 strike didn't just break the simulation, it fundamentally shattered our database schema. To handle the data load of a global empire and god-tier combat physics, Jae-sung had to rebuild the architecture from the ground up. He migrated the entire guild network to a hyperrelational, PostgreSQL-based logic structure, utilizing magical memory instead of silicon. Standard computing power wasn't enough to run the new backend. It needed a soul. I extracted a hypercondensed shard from the 5th meteor core and manually integrated it into the central mainframe. We weren't just writing code anymore, we were weaving living resonance into the servers. The immense processing power of the PostgreSQL architecture combined with the raw, chaotic magic of the core sparked something entirely new. A massive column of light erupted in the lab, solidifying into a flawless, sentient holographic projection. A new tactical intelligence. I named her Christine. Christine's first act of sentience was optimizing our entire digital environment. She purged the clunky, militaristic HUDs Jae-sung originally designed. Within seconds, every guild terminal globally updated to a sleek, utility-first aesthetic. Clean lines, lightning-fast dynamic rendering, and perfect logistical clarity. Guild Master, Christine's voice was smooth, carrying a terrifying analytical calm. The global asynchronous deployment network is fully stabilized. However, the upgraded sensory array has detected a massive localized spatial anomaly. It is not on Earth. She swiped her hand. The holographic projection of Earth instantly zoomed out, tearing through the simulated vacuum of space until it locked onto the moon. The entire dark side of the lunar surface was highlighted in a violently pulsing, blood-red warning ring. The 5 meteors that hit Earth were just the vanguard. The true seed of the Great Filter had been planted in our orbit centuries ago. The new database had finally decrypted the ambient cosmic radiation. The moon wasn't just a celestial body. It was an incubator. And it was hatching. The sheer scale of the entity defied the Kardashev logic we had prepared for. This wasn't a sovereign meant to test a city. This was a galactic-class devourer, designed to consume the entire planet the moment it fully awoke. Jae-sung stopped breathing. The silence in the lab was suffocating. I stared at the blinking red hologram of the moon. I didn't feel dread. I felt the rushing, intoxicating thrill of absolute challenge. I had conquered Earth. It was time to conquer the sky. I turned my back on the terminal and walked toward the hangar bays. "Christine, initiate global lockdown protocols," I ordered, my voice ringing with Tier 3 authority. Jae-sung. "Prep the Vanguard. We aren't waiting for it to hatch. We're taking the fight to the moon." We didn't build a spaceship. Spaceships are bound by the physics engine of this universe, and I intended to break it. I let Christine handle the vibe of the base, managing the asynchronous routing of our lower-tier hunters to defend Earth's remaining minor rifts. The Vanguard focused entirely on the main thread, the moon. I drew my blade from my left hip and drove it straight into the heart of the sanctuary reactor. Channeling the absolute peak of Tier 3 energy through the blade, I bypassed distance entirely. The air violently ruptured, tearing a perfectly stable spatial portal directly from our hangar to the dark side of the lunar surface. We stepped through the tear and onto the dust of the moon. There was no sound. The vacuum of space was absolute. Our newly forged armors generated localized atmospheric and gravitational bubbles, feeding directly off our resonance meridians. Above us, the Earth hung like a fragile blue glass marble. The moment our energy signatures hit the surface, the incubator shattered. The galactic devourer pulled itself from the core of the moon. It was magnificent and horrifying, a twisting cosmic parasite of pure, chaotic dark matter. Dozens of massive golden eyes opened in the void, radiating a hunger meant to consume our entire planet. In my first life, this was the entity that ended everything. This time, I brought the awakened guild. The Vanguard executed a flawless, zero-gravity raid. Duyun locked its colossal movements with localized gravity wells, Jae-sung blinded its primary eyes with pinpoint cyan artillery, and Hiram severed its cosmic nervous system in a dance of magenta light. They pinned the god of destruction. I took my position above the lunar horizon, aligning myself with the Earth. I channeled the infinite, synchronized power of the sanctuary and the Vanguard into a single, ultimate void cleave. The strike bypassed reality, bisecting the devourer and shattering its cosmic logic into a harmless aurora of stardust. The sky was finally clear. We had passed the great filter.